The man who you are going to meet in just a few moments exemplified the very best virtues that a man could possess. John Haslet had come to America in about 1757 from Ireland at the age of 30. He had been educated at the University of Glasgow and served as a Presbyterian minister. He had lost his first wife at the birth of his daughter Polly. He left her in the care of relatives until he could get established in the New World. After a brief stay in Pennsylvania, during which he served in the militia against the French at Fort Duquesne, he settled in Kent County, Delaware, in the Three Runs community, which we know today as Milford. Haslet decided to take up a career as a medical doctor and quickly gained the respect in the community as a civic and political leader. He had fought in the French and Indian War and gained a reputation as a military leader. When the relationship with the British king and Parliament became so bitter that the colonies were making the decision to seek independence, Haslet was a natural to step forward as the leader of a militia. When the newly organized Delaware Regiment was formed, he was the obvious choice to be its commander. As the pressure on General Washington and the Continental Army was becoming so dire with a massive force of British and Hessian troops moving into place to attack New York, the Delaware Regiment answered the call and marched to New Jersey to become a part of the flying camp. This was a combined army of the militias from Delaware, Maryland, and Pennsylvania. The Delaware Regiment stood out from the very beginning as one of the very best trained, best disciplined, and even best uniformed units of the entire Continental Army. They and the Marylanders became two of the best, most reliable forces, which General Washington regularly threw into the most demanding situations. Without a doubt, the military experience and the leadership ability of Colonel Haslet was instrumental in getting them into this position of outstanding soldiering and the reputation that their battlefield performance earned the name the Fighting Blue Hens. Following a series of devastating losses in the New York campaign and escaping across New Jersey to the safety of Pennsylvania, General Washington and his battered army were at a crucial juncture, as was the plight of the American cause of independence. On Christmas night, Washington carried out a daring plan to go on the attack, surprise the world by defeating the Hessian forces at Trenton. This 10-day period was to lead to a great upsurge in the fortunes and the optimism of the troops and the national psyche. George Washington's army was gaining a sense of confidence and felt that the success could be parlayed with a campaign to take back New Jersey. And following up on Trenton campaign, the plan involved crossing the Delaware River for a third time on December 30th, with the target being Princeton, which was one of the outposts that General Clinton had ordered. But when the army crossed the river at Trenton, they discovered that General Cornwallis had been ordered to leave New York to march his army to Trenton to come to the aid of the Hessians. He was too late to help them, but now was his opportunity for revenge. When the two forces met, they battled fiercely into the night. As the two armies were encamped only a short distance from each other, it was obvious that the clash would continue the next day, which was January 3rd. That brings us to a scene in the American camp on the evening of January 2nd. The commander of the Delaware Regiment, Colonel John Haslet, was meeting with his men, the only 5 soldiers still with General Washington. The others, desiring to head back to Delaware to their homes and their families, and having completed their enlistments on New Year's Eve, left a bit earlier. The 6 remaining Delaware soldiers were also free to leave on December 31st, but had agreed to stay into the next phase of General Washington's campaign.
Gentlemen of the Delaware Regiment, I thank you for joining me this evening on the eve before one of the hardest battles that we will yet be required to face. General Cornwallis, with his very well-trained, highly experienced force, is not far away. We can see the fires from their campsite. And my assumption is that we'll be awakened early on by the cannon that they're firing to start the battle. But I wanted to meet with you, men, and to thank you for the service that you've given since we first gathered back in January, initially as the Delaware Militia. But soon General Washington, recognizing our potential, inducted us in force into the Continental Army. We've been called the Delaware Blues, the Delaware Regiment, and now we can add to that the Delaware Continentals. When we first marched from Dover Green back in August of 1776, we were going to meet with General Washington and the forces. Well, I don't think he was there, but meet with his forces that were comprising the flying camp. That was troops from Pennsylvania, Maryland, and Delaware. And we were to be a flexible force to go wherever the need was. We were not long there until we were called up to the emergency that we'd been beckoned for, and that was New York. The British had gathered something like 30,000 troops, British and Hessians, and large numbers of ships, and they were ready to attack the western shore of Long Island. So when we got there, the battle was already raging. And I want you to know that I am definitely a friend and a fan and a supporter of General Washington. But he would acknowledge to you that he made some mistakes throughout the war. He'd only had 2 years of real military experience at that point, so in some ways he was a novice. The 2 mistakes he made at the Battle of Long Island were, number 1, he called a court-martial for a traitorous officer. And he had me and 11 other officers to go to Manhattan and be away from our troops. He did not know that that was the day that the battle would start. And he did not release us until the 2nd day of the battle. By the time we all got over there with our troops, it was all astir. Our situation was very detrimental, and we were being outgunned and outmanned. The second problem he had, that he didn't cover our flank. Now he could be excused because we didn't have cavalry, and he didn't have really much in the way of military intelligence. He had recently tried to get the intelligence set up by having a young man, a Yale graduate, Nathan Hale, to go into New York, but he was immediately killed. So General Washington did not have much in the way of military intelligence. So he could be excused for that. Now don't think that I'm a critic of General Washington. I'm very much a supporter. He will acknowledge those 2 mistakes that I just told you about. But what this man had, he had the ability to inspire men. He had the ability to make me, all of us want to follow him. And he did this very well. I recall on the night, Christmas night, just 9 days ago, when we were all getting ready in 3 groups, 3 attack groups, to cross the Delaware to go over and attack Trenton. He was so wise that he had us all to read something that had just been written on the 19th of December. The man who had written Common Sense, Thomas Paine, was with us that night, and he had said, "General Washington, would you be interested in seeing my latest work?" His latest work was called The American Crisis, and this he had to read to all of us that night to inspire us to continue the hard work toward the cause. These are the times that try men's souls. The summer soldier and the sunshine patriot will, in this crisis, shrink from the service of his country. But he that stands now deserves the love and thanks of man and woman. I cannot see on what grounds the King of Britain can look up to heaven for help against us. I call not on a few, but upon all. Not on this state or that state, but every state. Up and help us. Lay your shoulder to the wheel. Better have too much force than too little when so great an object is at stake. The men were very inspired by that. That's just one example of Washington's ability. Another example which I would cite, after we were soundly defeated on the Battle of Long Island, the British had forced us all of the troops, over to the north shore of Long Island, with their intention being, it was very obvious what their intention was, to the next morning bring in the ships, the British warships, and cannonade us as we were either hunkered there or trying to paddle our way across to Manhattan. General Washington wisely had lined up escape plan. Colonel John Glover of the Marblehead Fishermen had capable seamen all, and he had them to round up all the boats he could, and overnight, with their paddles wrapped in cloth so the British couldn't hear us, paddled across all of our men, which I think was in the neighborhood of 18,000 people, without the British detecting us. Now their goal had been to come in the next morning, first light, and just start finishing off our army. Well, General Washington had something else going for him too. He believed in divine providence, and he got many of us to believe in divine providence, because that form of divine providence that morning was one of the worst or best fogs we had ever seen. The fog so enshrouded us that the British ships had to wait till later as they filed their fingernails and drank their tea, waiting on to clear. All but 3 men made it across. And the rumor is that they were trying to find things of value. They were scrounging to find things of value. So, sorry for them. But everybody else got across. And so whatever criticism the world, the press, the population, critics in the Army, he had many critics in the Army. People wanted him to give up his leadership to General Charles Lee. And I'll tell you a story about him in a moment. So, back to the Battle of Long Island. We crossed, and then we were defeated at Kips Bay, defeated at Harlem Heights, defeated at White Plains, and after a series of these defeats, General Washington said, we need to get out of town. We need to go to the safety of Pennsylvania. So, historians, in just this few weeks, people who've talked about this have said it was kind of a miraculous thing that he got us across, because you've heard of General Cornwallis, the most tenacious, most aggressive general in the British Army, and he chased us all across New Jersey. Now, Philemon Dickinson, the general of the Pennsylvania militia, I believe he has a brother down in Dover. Anyway, he was charged by Washington to cut trees, to stop roads, to do anything he could to slow down General Cornwallis. Well, we made it across. We got to the, near Trenton, we got to the Delaware River, and Colonel Glover, we've all thanked God for Colonel Glover, had enough boats there to take us all across. And we barely made it across before General Cornwallis showed up. And he couldn't find any boats because Colonel Glover's men had rounded up every boat for 30 miles in any direction and taken them to the western shore. I left out one thing that I need to go back to. When we crossed that fog-filled night from Long Island to Manhattan, guess who was put in the rear guard because of the respect, admiration that the Delaware Regiment was given? We and our Maryland friends were the rear guard. Now, that was not the only time. He continued to have us serve as rear guard. And we all know such a place of honor that is, honor and risk, because you're closest to the enemy, but that allows the Army to move faster, and our job is to slow down the enemy. Well, here we were in Pennsylvania, pick a date, December 20th. The cause is at a serious crossroad. Most of the troops have a deadline of December 31st when their sign-ups end. Their enlistments ended, including all of ours, ends on December 31st. And as we know, most of our friends have already left early. They took advantage of that and went back home. So that's number one. He may not have an army on January 1st. Number two, he's lost so many battles that there was a swelling opinion. General Washington is not the man to command this force. We need General Charles Lee. I need to add something about General Lee. We troops did not think that was a very good idea. And to prove our point, as we were coming down, General Washington kept sending him orders, catch up with us. He was trailing us coming down Jersey, and General Washington says, catch up with us, we need to be together. Well, he took a night out, and I think it was Basking Ridge, and went and was drinking, and some might say womaning, and a local loyalist told the British where he was. So he was captured, and that took that problem off of General Washington's shoulders, and it brought a chuckle to many of us. At any rate, back in Philadelphia, General Washington decided we need to have some success. The campaign, the cause is going to fall apart without it. So he had gotten some intelligence, didn't have a lot of intelligence, but he got some pretty good, believable intelligence that the British themselves, not the Hessians, had pretty much moved to winter quarters in New York City. So they were gone, leaving 12 or 1,500 and 8 or 9 outposts that General Howe had set up. I could name a few. I really can. Amboy, Trenton, Burlington. At any rate, he'd heard that Princeton, don't forget Princeton, he'd heard that these were lightly guarded. And he saw this as his opportunity to win some battles, to bring the public opinion and recruiting efforts back in good shape. So he did plan that. We crossed, I think you just heard the third time, it was actually the fourth time, across the Delaware for the 4th time and came over with the intention to take Princeton. Well, when we got over yesterday afternoon, we discovered that our nemesis, General Cornwallis, was there. So we know, man, we know the difficult task that we have tomorrow as we face them. And this could be a make or break battle for us. And General Washington has been looking at the alternatives. One alternative is to stay and fight, and the other is to try to get around them to get back across the river. But the fact is, they are between us and the Delaware River. So it looked like the only option was to stay and fight them. But leave it to General Washington, and somebody, I don't know which general, suggested, well, there could be another opportunity. Maybe while he's waiting here, let's leave early in the morning and go to Princeton. Now, they're talking about that right now. Don't know, we don't have any orders to that effect yet, but we could get orders to change our plans. But in the meantime, we've got to assume that right over yonder, General Cornwallis and his thousands of crack troops. So I want you to get some sleep, gentlemen. And again, I want to commend you for what you've been able to do for us.
Sir, a message.
Orders. Thank you. Change of orders. Colonel Haslet, have your troops ready for march at midnight at the north end of camp. Report to General Mercer. You will march with the Marylanders under Colonel Smallwood. Colonel Haslet, you are to continue to be second in command to General Mercer. Gentlemen, hurry up, pack up. We've got a job to do.
The surprise in the letter to Colonel Haslet is that the Continental Army is to march in 2 columns to Princeton to attack that short-handed fortification. The reason that it is lightly defended is that the British and the Hessians, with all but a skeleton force, have marched the 12 miles to Trenton to meet the Americans and to punish them for their successful Christmas night victory at Trenton. The British Commander General Cornwallis is not only angry that the Americans won the battle, but he is further agitated by the fact that he was in New York, awaiting passage back to England for a long postponed leave to see his ailing wife. Shortly before reaching Princeton, the American columns encountered a British contingent which was heading south toward Trenton to add additional strength to General Cornwallis's troops. There was a heated battle with the tide turning toward the Americans. At a point in the battle, the horse of General Hugh Mercer, Haslet's immediate commander, was shot and went down. While he was down, Mercer was bayoneted multiple times, and he was soon dead. As the next in command, Colonel Haslet stepped into the leadership role, replacing Mercer. He was immediately shot in the head, killing him instantly. Thus ended his leadership of the Delaware Regiment and his life. Over the past 243 years since his death, on January 3rd, 1777, there has been a general recognition of the fact that his contribution to the Delaware Regiment was a substantial role while he was still alive, and that his impact continued throughout the war. He had been responsible for the recruitment, the training, and the discipline, all of which contributed to the reputation of the regiment and the pride of the troops who served as members of the Delaware Continentals. Haslet was initially buried in Philadelphia without fanfare as one of the many American casualties. 64 years later, after a planned construction project in Philadelphia led to a serendipitous event, the moving of his remains to Delaware. The Delaware government was notified regarding any interest the first state might have in receiving his remains. This led to a much heralded transfer of his body on July 4, 1841, with all the fanfare that could be mustered. This included a major event in Philadelphia, a transfer by boat to Smyrna and then by wagon to Dover, with all the military protocol that could be provided. The gravesite and monument for John Haslet is at the old Presbyterian Cemetery on Governor's Avenue in Dover. To recognize his contributions, there have been several organizations, such as the Daughters of the American Revolution, who have adopted his name to their group. Also, the Haslet Army in Dover carries his name. His widow, Jemima, was heartbroken and soon became ill, and she died shortly thereafter. One of his children, Joseph Haslet, became active in government and served 2 terms as governor. The first was in 1811 through 1814, which he served the War of 1812, and then another term in 1823, where he only served 6 months in office, from that January through June. Thank you.